Starting. Oh, hello. It's the inaugural Vision Denial episode of 2021. Unfortunately, Josh couldn't join us due to scheduling conflicts, but he will definitely join us at some point, um, especially when groups starts and the first half of groups is done. But hello, welcome back. It's our first 2021 episode of Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and that
And I'm Connor.
okay.
Sorry.
Well, we're here to talk about worlds, trends, cool stuff, how we think about the teams, how they're going so far, points totals, spoilers. Josh is really good at predicting things, even if he doesn't think he's good at that, and he's ahead. Anywho,
Yep.
Let's actually start this off. Connor, I'm gonna ask you real quick. How have you felt about the quality of the games so far that we've had?
That's an interesting question. I think I'm by no means disappointed or anything. There's definitely like a couple situations where you're like, is this the full potential we expected out of some of these teams? But it is play-ins, it is a lot of, as you say, emerging regions and stuff. So the fact that, sometimes whatever perks can't press R and these things like to go there. It's nothing unusual, right? Like everyone kind of expects, okay, we're going to step up a little bit when we get back to the group stage. So
that's fair. I mean, I would like to also compare it to like last year's Worlds. Last year's Worlds, it felt very much like the quality of the games were a cut above, right? And by no means do I think that they were a better quality of teams coming in. But they seemed like they had a better quality of games in the Playins last year.
I think my other 2 points on that is just, we'll talk about this more later, but because the meta is different than it was for most of the teams' playoffs. Mm-hmm. So instead of just going in and saying, I am playing the exact same thing I've been playing all year, there's a lot of, for example, I don't think a lot of the supports have as many games on amumu, like at all throughout their whole careers, because it's never been a thing before. So you can really see that it's a growing pain. It's okay, I've played 1,000 games of Thresh, which is insane, but I haven't played the amumu, so I'm not as familiar with the matchups and these kinds of things, right? Same with
exactly.
a lot of the junglers playing assassins, right? Like a lot of the junglers probably have never played games of Kiana before, right? Or like mid laners probably haven't played Tryndamere. So it's a lot of these things that are like, hey, I have to learn these things new, and when you can kind of see the growing pains a bit.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, I don't think teams have been clean about closing games.
Yes.
Which kind of makes it look a little bit more sloppy when it's like,
when teams
either the nerves of like they're backing off a lot, or like taking longer, or like we're gonna wait for the next big buff to like just being a little more cautious, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think that amount of caution is really bad if you're trying to aim for groups, because that tends to develop like really bad habits. I think before like I go into like the lack of closing or the weaker closing of a lot of these games, I want to piggyback off of like they're playing stuff that is drastically different from their meta, and like the last couple of years, at least their playoffs matched somewhat the what was going to go into Worlds, like with minor differences here and there, but the general overall play style and the approaches and thought patterns of like how jungle like how each role is going to be playing is just usually is the champions and their micro interactions. It definitely feels like the whole of the macro has just been like flipped over, right? Where like supports roam less in this so far in all of the games. There's been fewer roaming plays that happen. There are fewer herald plays that happen because there's less roaming, right?
Yep.
Junglers are neither doing ganking hard or farming hard. They're kind of meandering, having this like semi go at it. You find a lot of like farming for the first little bit, and it becomes lane matchups. It feels very 2003 or 2000,
The game
not 2003,
13.
2013, season 3. I mixed two, it jumbled. It feels very
2003.
2013, right?
Mhm.
Where like the thing that makes or breaks it is who's the better laner at the time, which is why I find it really refreshing to watch DFM play.
Okay.
And we'll get to that later, but I think like out of all of the 10 teams that were in play-ins, I think they're the ones that had the like an actual grasp at what the meta is. Like they may not be the better of the like two teams that have already qualified for groups, but they definitely had the faster. They were faster at reading what the meta was going to be, or at least their approach macro wise. Um, Going off of that, day one was really fun for me because I got to see not only assassin junglers but enchanters in game one and then regularly come back game after game, and also like a variety of changes within supports from like do they need an engage or do they need to like have some form of utility.
Yep.
And I thought, interesting, a change that was not fought against from Riot, that like people just kind of adopted naturally. um like how did you like how did you take away the fact of like some of the predictions that we had, and not just like we were right with some of the predictions, but like how do you feel about these particular changes that have come through now that we've seen them in action?
Yeah. Just to respond to the two things you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First of all, we had talked about the jungle assassins a lot. So far, in total, we've seen three of them played: Kiana, Talon, and Zed, which were the three ones that got buffed a lot. There are combined 6-2, with Kiana being the most played. So I do think they definitely have a place. Um, so what I did yesterday is went and tried a few games of Kiana jungle, and like it's not something we're used to. Me being like Sage Wadi is my main jungler,
Mm-hmm.
but um, so I think that definitely has a place going forward. I was going to ask you your opinions on that. It is interesting in the meta because it kind of enables a lot of these. We'll see the AP top laner plus the AP mid laner.
Mm-hmm.
Like we often might see like a Kennen or a Gwen and these kind of things coming in to go with the Kiana.
Yeah,
Curious your thoughts on that.
I think it's awkward currently because the way that they're
Okay.
being currently drafted doesn't enable for one or the other with a lot of these. Like they'll pick an assassin jungler, and have very little that would be enabled in the solo lanes, let alone very awkward engages from the bot lane. So you can tell
Very
that
little
when
front line.
assassin, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can tell when an assassin jungler is picked that there's forethought because there's something that is enabled for them in any of the solo lanes, which is why I think there's more success with more not traditional but like more expected junglers for a lot of people. Things like Jin Zhao or Graves, because like uh, it is really what's the wording? It's one of those things where like because they not only have they have a lot of practice, but because their roles in a team comp are like fixed and
More
expected,
established.
yeah, then it's
Yeah.
easier to play the macro around them. But if you understand what the macro use is of an assassin, you tend to find more success with it. Like assassins tend to be much better at helping set up neutral objectives, which is a counterintuitive thing, right? Because they're meant to duel a lot. And if you're able to duel a lot and you are ahead and you've properly set that up, then setting up anything for neutral objectives becomes an easier process, right? And especially since assassins also have a lot more mobility with it, you can compete with vision a lot more. So it's counterintuitive because like you take tank junglers because they're better at ganking and like enforcing counter jungling. You take farmers because they're able to clear more often, and so you're able to have more map movement. Assassin junglers so far seem to be really good at establishing vision and neutral setups for like long-term stuff, but not enough teams are doing that because there's still the mentality that they're assassins and their primary objective is to get gold and also to minimize the amount of players that are on the opposing team, because typical assassins are not good at team fighting. But the assassins that we have in the jungle, however, enable a very specific kind of team fighting. I'll ignore Zed for the most part, because Zed I think is just interesting. It's weird.
Yeah, it's played once mid lane, once jungle, whatever.
And it's more of a thing of like it snowballs a lot. But Talon provides a lot of space and zoning, right?
Talon can ward better. He can get into the enemy jungle, drop a bunch of wards, and get out a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fair.
And Kiana has like the very obvious.
She's an assassin who can team fight.
Yeah, she's an assassin who can team fight, but specifically has the ability to like, it's to set up a re-engage or a disengage, right? It provides different kinds of team fights. It's not just like, can this assassin team fight? There are assassins that can team fight just fine, right? Think of Diana. Diana can team fight, but she only provides one kind of team fighting, and that's usually skirmish all in. Kiana provides disengage, re-engage, and all-in engage, as well as skirmish. Kiana's a very flexible team fighter.
Champion, sure.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, I think it's fine for the most part. I'm just really frustrated with the lack of options that top laners are taking, because I think that's the role that has the least amount of thought outside of matchups from the lane. And it tends to not enable their junglers enough.
Okay. Let's come back to that. And then just to answer the second part of your question is the enchanters. We've seen Lulu, Karma, and Nami.
Yeah.
Two parts of this. So they were combined 0-4. We saw them a couple times.
Yeah.
They lost a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't been picked up in the last day or two, kind of thing.
Which I think is foolish.
Do we think teams are done with enchanters?
Probably.
Should they, or should they?
They should not be. It's stupid because they're not done with amumu, and amumu has an egregious worse score alone. So, like...
Well, I think that's... Support players are not comfortable on amumu, that it shows. But...
Yeah, but support players play an enormous range of really ridiculous stuff. They play Scion and Maokai.
Yeah, but they have games in that. I think before patch, 11.17 or whatever it was, I think the majority of supports are have 4 games played ever on amumu, in their entire careers. Most likely, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just not a thing that's ever... It wasn't like it was an off-meta played once or twice Scion support. It was nobody ever played amumu support.
Sure, but it is not the first time that Worlds will introduce a support that's being played randomly that made no sense, right? It's random picks in the middle that show up just because at Worlds is not a brand new thing. There's literally a Worlds where Alistar top was a thing. Triforce Alistar top. And none of the top laners previously had played a single game of Alistar going into it.
And I'd expect the same type of thing. Probably 80% of top laners, if you gave them Triforce Alistar, would be I'm not used to this, I'm not necessarily comfortable, to the same extent. They might be able to play it fine, but are they going to be able to pull out the outplays and everything you'd expect?
They really did at that World.
Some of them would have, right? Some of them would be more used to it. I think it's the same with amumu. We are definitely going to see some supports who are who look more comfortable on amumu and are okay,
sure,
I understand what I can get out of this. but there is going to be a bit of a learning curve to it.
I think the problem that I have with amumu primarily is because the tools that are provided from it are incredibly limited and leave you vulnerable right off the bat, right? As opposed to either our traditional engage champions or our enchanters who have like a multitude of different options because they're not necessarily throwing themselves headstrong right in. Now, no. I understand that the issue comes along with like what kind of team are they set up with the composition, and I think that largely relies on teams also still not understanding how to draft teams with the current like top picks.
Yeah, I think the other thing is it's one, Leona's a really good amumu counter,
Mm-hmm.
and that's being done a lot. And it's like it's the most common support matchup is if you take amumu thinking like, hey, it's the priority pick, we just take Leona, and it's really good at dealing with it.
Yeah.
So that's a primary thing. And the second thing is, compared to most everything else people are playing, amumu does not have a way out of the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Even compared to like a Leona, because if we think about it, it's like, okay, if I'm on an Alistar, I can headbutt somebody away and try to get out. If I'm on a Nautilus, I can like hook a wall and try to get out. As a Thresh, I can either not go in or flay someone away, or like, Rel, I can probably switch forms, jump back over a wall and get away. Like the majority of supports, Leona, I'm really just stunning and trying to walk away, but Leona's weakness has always been she can't get away, right? Amumu's even worse, because with your CC on Amumu, you jump to someone and you jump right with them. So it's not like you're jumping, like Nautilus just pulls you half and half. Amumu, you're going all the way.
Yeah.
So you're going way too deep. If they dash or flash or anything, you go with them, which sometimes is nice because it's like, hey, I can follow, I can stay with things. But usually it's like, we see plays where like, okay, the Amumu hits the Q. As the Q hits, the Tristana jumps under her own tower. Now the Amumu followed her all the way into the tower.
Yep.
And that happens all the time. That's like in the jungle sometimes. That's great because like, yes,
yeah,
I get to go in. But usually what happens is, well, you jump to the Rakan, who now jumped all the way to his teammate super far away. And like you just got pulled in, and now you're basically inting because now you got pulled into the entire enemy team and just die.
Yeah.
So you get pulled in way too far and can't get out.
I think also something that might be counterintuitive is that despite Amumu being a tank, is that he doesn't have inbuilt tank stats by default, right?
Yeah, a little bit of damage reduction.
But like his primary source of damage for the long part is going to be AP until he does build tank. Like his core is meant for that. And when you look at Leona's kit is inbuilt tank all the way through.
She has stat increases, which
right?
stack nicely with aftershock and stuff because they multiply with each other.
So Amumu has the counterintuitive situation of having to play like Leona but build like Morgana to be effective, but you don't want to do that because you want to survive. And so you have a support who by default would work, and then my thought goes, well, shit, if he needs more gold to be an effective build, to be able to use him, why is he not top lane?
My thing on that is I do think Amumu's fine as a support, but I think what people forget is Amumu increases magic damage that is being done. So if you want to make an effective Amumu bot lane, play him with a lane partner that's predominantly magic damage. However you do that, that's what I want to see from these teams. Now, there's lots of different answers on how you can play that, but like, play Amumu Ziggs, play Amumu Corki. I think these things are going to be more effective. The default is just like, hey, he's got a big AoE, so does Misfortune. Let's do that. That's just like kind of like the default first thing we see, and that's what we're expecting. Like, hey, Misfortune got buffed, her ult does more damage. Amumu ult plus Misfortune, like it's the natural go-to. But like, okay, why don't we see? Let's do it with the Corki because now we can guarantee that Corki's skill shots are going to hit, and that magic damage just gets multiplied by the Amumu. Right?
To note, Misfortune does magic damage also
with her E and stuff. Like
also her ult. Last I checked, her ult also does magic damage. And part of her passive, I believe, also does magic damage. It was a meme for a long time that her hit is a lot of magic damage while building AD, and it's counterintuitive.
Okay. If it does a bit, okay, Love Tap is physical. Double up is physical. I knew her E was magic. The alt is just physical.
Oh, okay.
Dealing
Well, I guess they
it
really
scales with
changed up.
AP. It's just
Oh,
all
it
physical. Yeah.
scales with AP. That's what's going on. Okay.
So I'd like to see someone play magic damage dealing something with amumu. Let's see the core, whatever it
even.
is. Swain. Yeah, Swain would be good because it pulls people closer.
Yeah.
Amumu's problem is he gets pulled too far. If Swain pulls you closer, your Amumu is less likely to be caught.
I think my problem is that a lot of these matchups that exist, they're just ham-fisting a lot of like, oh, this is good currently,
Yeah.
and I think I talked about this in my second daily daily sweeper video, that like red side is easier to play counters that are cohesive with a team because people are prioritizing matchups first in these drafts, or at least that's what it seems like. And so it becomes really easy to create drafts that counter well to the entirety of a team.
And red side is a higher win rate.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think that'll drastically change going into groups. I think best of fives for Playins will still stick to red side being better for the most part. But going into groups, I think that'll change drastically as people get an understanding of like what actually needs a priority. Like I think Misfortune will lower in priority entering groups, so will Amumu, so will many things. I think what will rise in priority is probably mid laners.
Okay. So my last points that I had that were related to that was we talked about Leona, but I want to point out she did get nerfed. It's like 5 armor magic resistant on W. But I think the reason why she's so good is because we discussed how she counters Amumu, but she also counters Rakan. It's been talked about because it's straight lines, meaning it's very easy to line up the E. And you counter Misfortune because your ult is on such a low cooldown. Basically, if I'm playing Leona into Misfortune, what I say is I can save my ult, assuming I have engaged elsewhere, and say, okay, the second Misfortune starts channeling her ult, I stun her with my ult.
Yeah.
Right? Guarantee. So I get that, half second type thing, cancel the Misfortune ult. And we've seen that happen a bunch. And it keeps being like, oh yeah, this Misfortune can never land a good ult. Yeah, because Leona just saves her ult for it and immediately stuns her.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it's worth doing every single time.
Yeah.
And we keep seeing that. It's like, oh yeah, Misfortune can't get a good ult off because Leona exists.
I think it's also because they're trying to use Misfortune's ult in very like non-advantageous ways. Like it's super counterintuitive. People will play solo queue and look at you when you do no damage as Misfortune because it's hard to go in. Misfortune is an all or nothing champion. You either stay alive or do damage and then die. It is very hard to go all in. Right? And because for your abilities to be effective, you have to be at a close range. It's not obvious. The games where like Misfortune does the best is where she's barely surviving off of nothing, and usually it's because there's a lot of peel has happened.
I think it's also people said Misfortune's all got buffed, so like it does more damage. It's like whoa, we do so much damage. And when you get that AOE and like you really land everything, it's gross. But because these teams are saying like, the Amumu and everything is like is to set up the Misfortune. Our team comp is based around setting up the big Misfortune ults, get the Wombo combo, everything dies. Cool. But as soon as I'm playing Leona and can cancel your Misfortune ult, now the rest of your team comp, which is based around setting up the Misfortune, is right. Like you've made the Amumu do way less, right? His ult doesn't mean as much now when you don't have that big AOE damage following up.
I think what's really bizarre too is that they're not trying to do anything to supplement just that combo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember when Lilia first started last year, and then the only time we saw Misfortune was with Lilia? Why isn't Lilia picked more often with Misfortune? I saw Lilia, 3 times?
Yeah, but...
Yeah. And she's not banned frequently. She's got a very low presence. Yeah. And it kind of surprises me because the most successful game of Lilia involved a Misfortune. Because their ults are... they work
so
well.
Good, yeah. It's being picked with Bard instead. It's like, Lilia Bard?
You failed the circle test.
And then my last point on enchanters was Seraphine got banned once, and it's not being played. If Misfortune is so high in priority, We keep trying Misfortune amumu. Why not the Seraphine? Like, I get that that
Yeah,
Amumu's like the bigger circle, like it's easier to hit. But Seraphine got buffed a lot. Like
yeah.
20 seconds is huge. We already saw Misfortune Seraphine is such a good lane. I expected Misfortune to rise in priority because of the Seraphine's rise in priority, but we're not seeing Seraphine. And the other enchanter that got a big buff was the 2 seconds off the Morgana E. Morgana was already good. Like,
Yeah, like it
why no
was.
Seraphine and Morgana?
I'm just kind of baffled by this very high priority on a Mumu,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it's not being drafted in any ways that like enable it to be successful, and a very
Yeah.
low priority on any of the enchanters, especially when like you're they like ADC, like any marksman currently being picked is being picked as an afterthought mostly. If you got Misfortune, great. But like all of the marksmen so far feel very lackadaisical that and don't gel with the rest of the composition and feel like an afterthought. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they're not focusing on it.
And
It's a lot
so
on that. So
it's really hard to like really hone in on a lot of enchanters because they're stupidly dependent on your like your bot lane matchup, which is to me why I think a lot of the weaknesses and why they're not coming up as often is that there's an assumption that Amumu and Leona will be priority, then secondly Rakan. And because of it, it's hard to like assume anything else because you're like, well, none of the ADCs are good, and because we don't know what the ADC matchups are going to be, it's hard for us to actually want to put things up, right? Like if they pick Misfortune and some other support automatically that isn't Leona, you get like Lucian Nami that comes up, and that's a fairly good matchup usually because Lucian Nami is crazy oppressive. Um, I'm surprised we haven't seen an Ezreal Yumi, given the amount of Ezreals we see. That Ezreals do almost nothing. Um,
and once. But yeah.
right? And to me, it's more indicative that these teams did not do any preparation during their quarantine, or not any effective preparations.
I wouldn't go that far necessarily, but um
I,
I
I
guess.
don't know how else I would view the way that the teams are drafting and playing.
Okay, on a kind of related note then.
Yeah.
The top 4 champs that are being picked banned almost every game. They were 100%, but then a couple of them didn't get picked today. But Aurelia, Misfortune, Lucian, and Lee Sin are the 4 that are
Mm-hmm.
like, 95%. 280 carries.
Sure. And one of them is actually a flex pick for 3 lanes.
Sure.
And so it's not
We haven't
usually a
really seen Lucian top or anything
um
much yet.
except given the fact that you had LNG and Hummel Life who both have Lucian top lanes, and you have a bunch of other very hyphy want to like get going top laners across the board in all of these 10 teams. These top laners have done almost nothing in comparison
Yeah.
for a lot of their picks. They feel they feel very passive. The biggest like the names of most of these games right now are everyone's junglers and mid laners who seem to have the largest impact in the game, and when it's not them, it's the bot laners as like last ditch effort. And given the fact that I'm 100% certain, 100% certain, by the time groups arrive, teams will realize that the priority should be for top laners and bot lane, that this narrative will switch. But right now, they're not going to do that because teams are not being drafted in a way that allows to enable those lanes, and then they're having a harder time, uh, like gaining foothold of like any kind of neutral setups or getting any footholds on wave manipulations, which leaves you with like, oh, the only team that's really good at doing any of those things is Cloud9, but then they draft things that are really poor for team fights and then lose those team fights.
Do you think any of those 4 champions will stay that high priority?
I think Aurelia will reduce in priority.
Okay.
And I think that unless some new matchup comes up for the bot lane, Misfortune will stay. And I think Lucian will probably be banned less often. And the fourth one, so it was Lucian,
You said.
Misfortune, Aurelia, and Lee Sin. Lee Sin baffles me because, like, I don't, given the kinds of junglers that are around, Lee Sin doesn't feel important enough to ban.
Yeah.
Like, if you pick, are you afraid because you're like, oh
He is
shit,
banned quite a
everybody's,
lot.
yeah, you're like,
Yeah.
oh shit, we know that everybody's playing assassin junglers, but like, what if he's just really good at Lee Sin and like I'm just not like, good enough at the assassin role? And I'm like, well, fuck, set up your jungler to like be more like enabled at
I
this
think
point.
my thing on that is teams saying, okay, if Misfortune is our highest priority thing, um, we do not want to play Misfortune into Lee Sin because she doesn't have a way to not get kicked, basically. So it's like we don't want to see Lee Sin. I don't know.
I feel
That might be totally wrong.
I
It's
feel
just
like
a thought.
I think I think it is wrong because there's too many engage
Okay.
options that are meta. Like my brain has to think about like how do you approach engage in certain team fights? And Lee Sin has less and less become engage option and more disengage option, right?
Okay. It's
And
way easier to kick stuff out.
so like
Yeah.
kicks are really good at avoiding fights or delaying fights, especially during neutral objectives. And so that
Okay.
tells me that like teams are still trying to figure out from the priority junglers how it matches up overall with team comps. And Lee Sin is the common denominator that they have a lot of practice on that also disrupts those plays. And to piggyback, I think Misfortune needs to just stop. I do not care if Misfortune like somehow is really good in team fights. None of these teams are team fighting well or drafting for team fights. Or not drafting in ways that actually work for team fights that are in this meta. So Misfortune needs to stop because you're never going to enable. Like, I don't think she's going to reduce in priority. Heck, I was really happy to see that, like, she was rising in priority. But by the time halfway through the second day arrived, I was like, can it stop? Can it just go away? It's just like, I'm seeing it's like auto tax and then double tap. Great, cool. E from a distance. Walk away. Get closer. Attack a couple of times. Walk away. Get a little closer. Oh, is it time for ult? The ult hits nothing. Walk away. I'm like, guys, did you not think through how this is gonna go? Did none of your like strategists on your teams like go by any kind of play by plays that would work for this? Did no one have the forethought of this not working? On paper, I was like, cool. We've got like Nami Misfortune. That's great. Those two synergize very well in terms of drafting in the bot lane, right? Like there are so many supports that Royals in priority that work really well with Misfortune, and then the rest of the composition does literally nothing to enable it after laning phase.
Yeah.
Stop picking it. Pick Ezreal. Pick Lucian. Like those
Yeah. They're
two.
not playing Misfortune with Oriana and Malphite and other stuff. Like the whole team sets it up.
Yeah.
They're just being like, Amumu's all we need.
The only team that does it is Cloud9, and they don't actually know how to team fight as a team.
Okay.
Do you know how rough it is to see Cloud9 hit all the check marks and then just like throw shit away? Because
That's saying good job, Cloud9 coaching staff.
yeah,
You gave them what they needed. Did they do it right? Right. In case you have any thoughts on the others, just that are really high, there is an obvious like most played champion in every role, but it's interesting how there's one champion that's considerably above the others in every position. We've already discussed the other two, but Xin Zhao is actually most played in jungle just because Lee Sin's banned so much.
Yep.
Jace is the top laner, and Silas is mid laner.
Oh my
Any
god.
thoughts?
That just tells me that they're uncreative little hacks. I don't know. It just, it's not that they're uncreative. It just tells me that they're still uncomfortable with the meta. Like, I have had no point where I thought that these teams knew what they were going to do.
We don't know what we're doing.
Okay, the general, no one knows what they're doing, but I don't think they knew what they were going to do. Not like they know what they're doing. I don't think they knew what they were going to do. And so they just go in here and they're like, cool, this is what's been picked. Well, what's the counter matchup? Well, I'm good with Jace. I can do Jace. And so
As you said at the beginning, they're playing for lane matchups and stuff.
yeah. And so, of course, the things that have like very consistent, very safe approaches that are easy to transition to the mid game are likely going to put priority. And this used to not be the case in Playins. Playins was the play where like you were able to experiment with things that weren't necessarily in your back pocket so that you can test the waters of what's going on and then like go wild. This year people seem to have looked at the competition that was going into Worlds and go, shit, this is the best lineup we've seen at Worlds ever, and then proceeded to do nothing. LNG and Hummel Life were the only ones who were limit testing. And like, I was criticizing them in the video that I made. All right? I was like, shit, you guys need to take this seriously a little bit. If you limit test, they're going to do that more often to you in groups. You're going to get punished. But like, what was everybody else doing? Huh? Detonation focused me as a godsend. They actually looked like they had a plan going into it. Their first day, like their first game against Cloud9, when they lost, they at least looked like they had a plan going in. Every game after that, they looked like they had a plan. They knew exactly what they were going to do at any given moment. And sure, that might be predictable, but at least they knew what they were doing. God.
I do have two very specific things.
Yes.
Like, it was pretty funny. So after I think it was like the first game, he played Gore Drinker Trendemir was the first thing.
Mhm.
I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous series or not, but I was watching, I think it was Nemesis and LS, we're talking about it, how he's like, I think his Nemesis has been playing Korean solo queue and has like just utterly insane win rate, like top of the Korean ladder kind of thing. Just playing one-tricking Trendemir mid with Ghost, Gale Force, Quick Blades, right? And I was like, and he's specifically saying everyone wants to play that Gore Drinker, but Gale Force is actually better because the distance you can do and stuff with Gale Force Trendemir, it's just kind of insane. You don't need to survive with Gore Drinker because you have your ultimate.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why am I trying to stay alive as Trendemir? It doesn't matter how much damage you take. So I was like, should people be playing Gale Force Trendemir? And then we immediately see it twice in a row. After that, I was like, oh, my own question got answered before we had time to do a video. Do you think that's something that's going to stay? Do you expect? I personally think it's super good, and should even be played like top lane and these kinds of things as well. It doesn't necessarily need to just be mid lane.
Do you want to hear a hot take?
Okay.
I think it would do better in jungle. Blue Smite Trindamere. Okay.
Doesn't matter about doing less damage to you. You just need to cover space. Get more movement speed.
Yeah. It effectively does what you do with Ghost.
Does Trindamere survive the early clear, though?
What you do is you tend to have a weirder clear, but with the amount of assassins that exist, if you know your opponent's going to pick an assassin jungler, go Trindamere. Like, you're going to effectively challenge their duel all the time.
They're not dying.
Like, you're going to tell me that, like,
And Gale Force Tryndamere can totally match the mobility of like anything.
And yeah, so if you're not going to do that to set up neutral objectives, if you're not going to do that to set up like any dives or any type of team fighting, when Tryndamere literally is like does the effective same thing that Jin Zhao does, while providing the same kind of like damage output that an assassin would, why the hell not?
And you don't risk getting like, poked out by a really good Azir player or something. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's like strong enough as a jungler, but like you're building crit and stuff. Like I'm sure you can build lifesteal, and like your late clear is obviously great. But it just depends on how good their early levels are. But it's definitely an interesting thought. I want to see more of it.
I honestly don't think it's very good, unfortunately.
I'm curious to see the answers to it. Well, it's just like
it's one of those things where I look at it and go, all right, cool. It rose in priority because it is a solid answer in solo queue, and it has very few answers that are obvious. But when it's only played in the mid lane, it tends to undercut your team fighting. Right? It tells me that the teams that are playing it, that lose to it, don't have like a strong idea of how to like handle that kind of champion. And it's weird because we've had an Aatrox forever, so you'd think they'd know.
It gets countered by like the really, really strong disengage, and teams aren't necessarily playing the super good disengage, right? Yeah. So like the way to beat that is to play your Gragas, your Janna, your Thresh, your those are your different styles, but like right, these kinds of options, your Poppy, your right, like Poppy's really good. So like yes, but teams aren't doing that. They're saying, oh, if your support's an amumu, sorry to go back to amumu, but you can't disengage a Tryndamere really as the amumu.
No.
Like you can stun him, but like even that's pulling you in, right? Like so teams aren't, the Misfortune doesn't have as good disengage. She's not like the Xayah or that can, ult away from things. It's Ashe that can slow him, and even that, right? Like
so in that effect, I do think it'll stay and maybe rise more in priority if people are still doing the foolish thing of doing a Mumu Misfortune more and more. But if teams are smart,
it's good into the silly things they're doing.
Yeah,
but at that, like Lee Sin and Jace are decent at pushing things away.
Yeah,
there is that.
So like I'm thinking when you get to the group stage and the other 12 teams are looking at this and they're like, the hell is everyone doing?
You know what's really, really, really good? Tryndamere Yuumi.
A Yuumi? Tryndamere Yuumi? Wow. Again, I'm here baffled as to why there are not enough enchanters being picked. All right, let's move on before we start getting more and more frustrated with this. Do you have one last thing?
I had one more, which was something I really appreciated was the Everfrost Spellbook Malphite top from Fledge. Even more specifically, as a Lilia counter.
Yes. No, again, good job to the coaching staff of Cloud9.
So, just to explain this for anyone who's like, why is Malphite a Lilia counter? You build armor, she does magic damage. Sure. But at the same time, you're tanky enough that Lilia is not really going to kill you. Lilia's main advantage in lane and as a champion is that she's faster than you. Reasonably, right? She can run in circles around you. That's what she does. Well, Malphite steals percentage movement speed. So the faster you are, the more movement speed he gets. Meaning, no, he is faster than you. So you just max Q early on. Okay, cool. Now I'm stealing, I think it's 40% of your movement speed. So if you're I think I did the math, it's like you're a 550 movement speed Lilia. Not too difficult, right? Okay, he steals 220. Now your move speed is 330, and his move speed is like 600. Oops, Malphite's way faster than you.
I actually thought it was genius to see, like, when the first 2 days when Cloud9 was really going off, and I was like, oh, I'm super pleasantly surprised. except for the fact that they keep doing stupid engages, but they're doing everything else right. I was like, it was one of the only teams that I could confidently say were drafting with purpose, other than like DFM. It's just too bad they don't play with purpose.
Yeah, and he just keeps taking short trades because like he can run away faster than you now.
Yeah.
He gets his shield back, keeps taking short trades, builds mana because Everfrost gives 600 mana. There goes your mana problems that you normally have with Q spam. Cool.
Yeah, I mean,
What are you gonna do as a Lilia to that? It's like he has an on-click ability that counters you.
and then the rest of your team can't re-engage you get a sleep in. You're like, oh great, I did my thing. The rest of your team is knocked up for the entire duration. You're like,
yeah, and he's still a Malphite. He counters you with just his Q. Yeah, because of what Lily is, she's really weak to on-click abilities.
Yeah.
So the on-click percentage movement speed's low. It's terrible. Yeah, that's it. I just really enjoyed that. It's just funny because like, oh yeah, and that 3 seconds, it lasts so long. Most like slows and stuff decay over time. If you look at the majority of the slows in the game, it's like
they have a decay period. Yeah,
95% slow, decaying over 2 seconds. So by 1.5 seconds, there's only whatever 20% left or something. So it decays quickly. Malphite slow doesn't decay. It stays the whole time. And 3 seconds is really long.
It's kind of ridiculous. All right.
It's
To move on from this, we now have 2 teams that have qualified for groups automatically, because LNG is the 4th Chinese seed. They have to be slotted in Group D.
yes.
No matter what. With that, DFM has 3 groups that they'll be slotted in. Barring any other expectations to the contrary, right? It is likely that they'll be slotted in Group B. This is the assumption that like Cloud9 and Homolife move on. Right? Because of that, Homolife has to be in Group C, and by default then Cloud9 has to be in Group A, so they'll probably be in Group B. Given that assumption, if Detonation Focus Me were slotted in Group B, do you think they would have a chance at making out of groups?
Okay, I'm just putting that visually there for a second just to see it. So we're saying Cloud9 has to go in Group A.
Yeah, because Group C would have
C has to
Homolife.
be HLE.
Yep.
Right. And that means LN.
It's already there. LNG's already
Oh,
there.
yeah. Right. Because they have to be there.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Read that bracket.
So given the expected results,
The expected result.
right, which I don't think will actually be all that expected, DFM would have to be slotted in a Group B. I think they would have the best chance of getting out of groups if they were slotted in Group A.
Against DK and FPX?
I really want you to think about the playstyle of DK and FPX. And then I want you to think about the way that DFM almost beat DK twice in MSI.
That's a bold take.
No, it's
I don't
not really that
disagree with
bold
you.
of a take.
Nope.
They almost beat them twice. And Rogue is just Rogue.
Yeah.
You know.
I definitely think they could get third in that group. But I guess the better question is B.
Yeah, B is primarily what I'm...
Group B was already the group where it's like T1 is good. They're not unbeatable. EDG is very good. But they're not everyone's like favorites necessarily or anything.
Yeah.
100 Thieves might be good. Do they have a chance in this group?
I think they'll have a better
I think it'll be a
coaching
very
staff.
interesting group for sure.
Yeah.
it was already the group where you're looking at it and you're like, do I see a world where 100 Thieves gets second? I think with DFM, they're I think it's probably fair to say DFM ends up being pretty much the same as 100 Thieves. Probably pretty similar strength wise. I'd rate them about the same. So looking at that, saying like, is there a world where I see 100 Thieves getting second? And I think if you ask that question, then you have to go with the question: is there a world where I see DFM getting second?
And if the answer is yes, for one,
Then the answer is yes to the other.
yeah.
Yeah.
And people can see 100 Thieves likely getting out of this group
Yeah.
if the cards are played right.
Like I think DFM versus 100 Thieves is probably a 50-50.
And given T1's shaky competitive history currently,
Yeah.
EDG is the only team that I think that is going to solidly get out of this group unscathed.
Yeah, I think it helps 100 Thieves and DFM if EDG is able to actually be really, really, really good and go like 6-0.
Yeah.
I think that helps them because it means like if T1 steals a game off EDG or something, it hurts the other ones. And they're the most likely ones to take a game off EDG, right?
Off them. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Granted, at the same time, then, if 100 Thieves or a DFM steals a game off EDG and T1 doesn't, that's the world where they get second place, right? Is if they're able to 1-1 split the T1 games,
yep.
Which, again, not necessarily easy,
no,
but you can see it, right? 1-1 split the T1 games, and then steal a game off EDG and T1 doesn't. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot to say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's doable.
Hey, that's literally the goal, right?
I put it at like 10% each.
That's not zero.
Yeah, it's not a low number.
I don't think it's likely. I am very hyped. I said that this team was better than like Cloud9. Like if I was to pull up my original rankings for this, dear goodness.
Like I have been looking at it going like, I want to try to predict 100 Thieves as like the second place. I want to. Can I justify it?
Yeah, if I was to pull up my original, oh gosh, this document's old. There we go. I ranked DFM under Team Liquid, LNG, and 100 Thieves, but above Beyond Gaming, Rogue, and C9. Right? Okay. I remember you looked at me and you're like, that's kind of wild. Look where we are at now. That doesn't mean anything really. Are you still there? Or are you just very still? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm motionless.
Yeah, because going into this, I thought this was like a super competitive team compared to a lot of the other emerging regions. And I thought that they had they were more coordinated than the lowest seeds of the
More
PCS,
experienced.
of the LEC and the LCS, right? That the only team that I thought was like a low seed amongst them all that I would like argue against were like Homolife and LNG being just better. But here we are now, like in a situation where DFM has beaten Cloud9 in a very decisive fashion for their tiebreaker and has been consistently better than all of the other teams. Like on like just looking at their games, they look more decisive. Do you know what I mean? Because Homolife are fractured and inconsistent. They keep making the same kinds of mistakes frequently, and it doesn't seem like they've shaken off their like random like regular season jitters all too much. They've had to play two best of fives to get to Worlds. And I've had like similar-ish concerns that I had with Gen G, going in. But given the caliber, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. And given these best of ones, it doesn't give me the same kind of prospect, especially when you have like red candidates who are like, hey, first 10, 15 minutes of the game, we're in charge. And like the difference maker here is like, who's more like who does you feel is like, mind the flashiness, like flashy games is one thing, but like
Mhm.
LNG were flashier and still didn't feel as decisive as DFM. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. I think LNG was a lot of individual play
Oh yeah.
that was enabled by their teammates saying like it's individual play based on like, okay, we've put deep wards and we know where their jungler is, so therefore top lane you're safe to do. You know what I mean? Like it is
Yeah, yeah.
obviously they're doing all that, but like, you know, Ale's been really good, that kind of thing, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a couple of games where it's like, yeah, it's kind of just they're you can almost tell they're better mechanically
Yeah,
than some of their opponents.
it's a
So
situation of like, oh, here's five. It's like the five strangers who are all masters versus a team of like intermediates. Sure, one may look more coordinated, but the other ones are bar for bar
yeah.
better and whatnot.
Whereas like LNG, it's like they haven't as a team looked like, as you said, but they don't look like they're necessarily all higher elo players. Not the whole team.
Yeah. It just feels weird.
I don't know.
I don't think this will translate into groups, although mostly because I think that the teams that the DFM were slotted with, and this is why part of me when we were doing our predictions of which group did you want to have them in, I didn't
Yep.
want LNG and Homolife to be in the same group. I wanted DFM to be in one of
Yeah.
those two groups with playing one of them. And if they're going to
To
play
see.
both of them, it's less for the seeding, but more for like these teams all suffered. All of these teams suffered going into groups for that. And it's the thing that people don't realize that like for the integrity of the competition, this was the correct thing to do. You have to draw. But for the sake of them practicing, having both Homolife and LNG in the same group when it was so clear that they were better than everybody else going into Worlds hurt Cloud9 because they were playing against a bunch of people who just let them throw themselves at them except for like one team, right? And
Um. Yeah.
right beyond
Beyond Gaming
gaming,
kind of felt like the Doggo show, and
they
if
didn't
he
even
didn't solo
do.
carry,
Yeah, and they didn't even actually let Doggo do the Doggo show all that much. And I bet you
yeah.
that if they got beaten hard by either LNG or Homolife, they would have had to reevaluate how to approach the game. Neither of the teams in Group B had to deal with one side being super competitive against them for them to reevaluate how they approach the game. And in Group A, once LNG and Homolife played against each other, they became kind of like lackadaisical about everything else. They were like, cool,
Yeah.
this is the standard. Korea and China are the two regions to beat. Let's do some like
But
power testing. And then they kind
you
of
know
like
what?
played a random
Every
game.
every one of the games though, like I thought Red had a chance. Like they are better early game teams that we've seen, but like at 15 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
if you took away the name tags, like you'd say like you Red very easily could have won their games against HLE and LNG.
Yeah, which is
Like
weird
they had a
because
good chance in both games.
Red is not an early game team. this,
Oh,
this
it looks like that way from
it
mostly watching.
really does. This is the thing that like pleasantly surprised me about Red, which is why
Mhm.
I'm gonna like talk about later how like in the best of
Okay.
fives going forward. Um, actually, might as well transition to that now,
Yeah. Okay.
right?
Yep.
Going into best of fives because this is how we translate the idea. Going to best of fives, you've got your Peace versus Red, right? I expect Red to win, despite like the results that happened today. I don't. I think Red is a more consistent team overall and is likely to be better at pivoting. And given the way that they've been doing their best of fives, their playoff best of fives. I think that they're going to approach it better. And
Okay.
with that, regardless of Peace or Red winning, I think it is so likely, even if I predicted 3-0 for C9, right? That's the. I think it is so incredibly likely that either Peace or Red beat Cloud9.
Just Cloud9 choking and stuff.
I don't even think it's about choking. I think it's straight up like a combination of hubris and their very weak approach to best of fives. Cloud9 feel like a best of one team,
Yeah.
and we've
They're
talked
an
about it.
inconsistent team.
Yeah, and we talked about how like their best of fives really underwhelm us. They tend to not be in control of their best of fives.
Yeah.
And given the fact that they lost to what arguably is the worst team going into Worlds because of their inconsistency and because they didn't learn to pivot and adapt at the time, it does not surprise me if
Well,
they lose game 1 or game 2 of the best of
it's
5
just
against either
like
of these teams and then lose the rest.
it's not even that. Like it's like look at pause the game like 5-10 seconds before any of the team fights Cloud9 did at any one of their games, and it's like Cloud9 is generally coming at fights from like 3 different angles constantly. It's like okay, if you have these like you have the flanking Jace like constantly in these kinds of things from Cloud9. It's like well, okay, maybe you pull it off and like you're able to actually get the enemy backline and these kinds of things. But that is very easy to pick apart. Like you can tell that okay, certain teams weren't able to handle it, and they got okay. Wait, do we turn on the Jace? Do we turn on the front line? Like
Yep.
which way do we go? Kind of thing. And like, but like the DFMs and stuff were like, okay, we stick together, we stay grouped as 5. Okay, we're doing this. We turn here. Okay, now we do this. That I'll have like the more coordinated shot calling.
Yeah.
You can tell from that. It's like, huh. Yeah. Whereas Cloud9 is they're all doing their own thing. They're all on different sides. That's it. They're all doing their own thing.
Yeah.
They're not coordinated as a group.
It's
They're playing Misfortune, which is like the team fight setup, and they're all doing their own thing.
it's like they were told how to do all of the setups for properly team fighting and getting everything else. They'll get a lot of gold from those setups. And then they'll just be like, "Oh, cool, I guess we fight now." Because
Like Perks is on Silas, and it's like, yeah, I'm over here. I think it was Silas. Like in the getting the scuttle by Baron while everyone else is setting up for Dragon type things. It's like I'm in the opposite river. We're gonna fight now. It's like, well, sure. Like flanks can be very good. They're not all going in at the same time. It's like, okay, Silas. It doesn't feel coordinated.
no, it doesn't. And like because of it, it's kind of hard to tell if Cloud9 is actually even better than Red or Peace if it's very easy to see a world where that happens. On paper, straight up, on paper,
And
Cloud9
like,
should win. 100%.
sure,
If you argue that
yeah.
on paper they're going to lose, it's hard to see a world where you're like, that makes sense. If you look at their performance,
And like sometimes, Blabber just whatever, Olaf ults in and kills someone, and then Perk jumps in and kills someone else, and they leave. It's like, hey, Cloud9 won the fight. It's like, well, was that coordinated, or was that just Blabber outplayed one person, then Perks outplayed someone else, so then they won?
yeah.
Like that worries you when it goes to like Worlds, because it's like you're not going to be able to just rely on individual outplays to win team fights.
No, you're really not. And
You're not going to beat the best teams in the world doing that.
you're going to face off against, like, I mentioned that Red is likely to win, mostly because they're a team fighting team primarily.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like it, but they are. They're mechanically gifted, they're young, and that's how they got to Worlds is from proper team fighting. That, like, if they face off against Red, I can see 100% of the time them catching out Cloud9 fight after fight after fight and then going.
Mm-hmm.
And then if Cloud9 do win, given the way that things have to go off, if Homolife also win, right? Because that's a different thing I want to talk about. Then they're slotted against DK versus FPX, two notoriously stupidly good team fighting teams, and Rogue, who despite I have so many things that I'm like, I rather Rogue have played into play-ins than like some of these other play-in teams. Like I rather LNG would have been slotted automatically, or Homolife, either or. Rogue is still much more coordinated in team fights.
I came up with a good analogy, which is I think Cloud9, especially because they have perks too, it is kind of like the old G2 Lite, where it's like the difference between them almost is it's like, yeah, G2 is pulling off these 12 flanks and they're all on different sides, but when G2 said, okay, I'm going in, the rest of the team went for it as well, right? Whereas Cloud9 kind of feels like if Perks or Fudge or someone is doing something, the team isn't all immediately doing the same thing.
Yeah.
G2 is like, yeah, maybe they're coming from 3 different angles. Maybe they like, why are you off killing that scuttle crab? But when they actually do say, okay, we're turning now, at least everyone turns at the same time. And that's the difference.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they're doing nonsense. Maybe they're off doing individual plays. But when someone says we're going in, they all go in.
I can't.
That works when you can individually outplay people, and then you're at least all doing the same thing.
And like coordination is such a huge factor with these games that like the second you look uncoordinated is the second that you've lost all your footing and all your momentum. Right? Controlling the pace of a game, either in team fights or outside of it when you're doing setups, if there's not everybody on the same page and everybody's trying to be an individual hero, I think I repeated this line over and over again, even during the wins for Cloud9. It looks like they're all trying to do hero plays as individuals.
Yep.
As if they think they're the ones who have to do the hero play to win. And I think that's infectious because I think this is Perks doing. I really want you to think about the playstyles of all of the other players before they join Cloud9.
Blabber. I mean, Blabber was kind of known for like, he's on Olaf or Lee Sin or...
Yeah, in his early game, he'd be super
and
aggressive.
he's like, yeah, he invades the enemy jungle. Not necessarily in team fights, right? But it's like, yeah, he's going for these things, making the individual play and then doing stuff. But that's much easier to do in a 2v2 or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But like in team fight settings, Blabber was always patient. If he was ahead, he was the shot caller. Right? And then he would follow whoever else was like doing the things. It seemed like Cloud9 before Perks was more organized. Now, not just to be like, oh, it's Perks' fault. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just because Perks is bringing in a culture that worked with G2 almost by accident.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily work with this group. Before we just keep going on to the Cloud9 what the fuck guys train, see my little thumbnail for the previous video. Homolife.
The thumbnail for this video needs to be an amumu with Cloud9's logo on his head.
If you make a pose doing this, I will have that there in there. So I'm not gonna like mince it. GS versus BYG is an incredibly close matchup, but I think that's mostly because of momentum from Galactasarai, and then Beyond Gaming. Beyond Gaming is 100% a best of 5 team.
Yeah.
Right. Their regular season, their score is not great. They got second place, but they also were like not a great score line given. Granted, most of the PCS is not like a super fantastic region, but they were the only team to beat PSG at all and during best of fives, right? Given that given that Beyond Gaming is a much better best of five team, if they were to win and not completely falter underneath Galactasaray, and because they're so experienced at beating teams that are significantly better than they are, and given Homolife's very inconsistent approach to the game, is there a world where Homolife doesn't make groups?
It's a good question. So yeah, I do have Beyond Gaming winning that series, unlike you, because yeah, I think they're just the overall better roster, probably, is what you'd say, and like especially the way Dog was playing and stuff. If they really just are able to win through their bot lane,
Yeah.
set that up, and then carrying that forward. If we look into you almost need to look at that series, and it's like if HLE are going to lose to Beyond Gaming, it needs to be just because they're the two players carrying their teams. They are. Doggo needs to be like at least 3/4 or more of a Chovy. Like he doesn't necessarily need to single-handedly beat Chovy, but like Doggo needs to be on the same level or playing the same game as Chovy, right? Doesn't need to be the better player,
Yes, I agree.
but he's got to at least be able to like match him somewhat.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
That's a tall order, right? But like he needs to like if Chovy's got a big CS lead, he needs to have like an equal CS lead bot lane.
Yeah.
You know, these kind of things, and it's like, can he do it? Sure.
My issue is that Beyond is not drafting for Doggo.
Yeah, like
they're drafting with Doggo as an afterthought. And given how much bot laners actually make or break games recently, the fact that Doggo is not being given the priority does not give me much hope on anything, right?
And they like give him the Aphelios, give him the Draven, build the team around him, and just go for it.
Yeah, like worry about what the
if you're gonna win that series.
Yeah,
camp bot lane, just 4-man tower dive, just go for it.
Yeah,
don't play the Chovy. Pick Twisted Fate mid lane or something, and just don't play the Chovy.
Like honestly, just like you're in play-in still, effectively an extended playoffs of your region.
Yeah,
and you want to win, do it the same way you got to Worlds. Group stage is where you're going to have to learn how to properly do the meta. But if you're just guessing what the meta is right now and not playing to your strengths, you're going to lose because everybody else is guessing, and they're going to be, if they're guessing towards their strengths, they're going to beat you.
If we go into that series and we see Beyond Gaming and their roster is something like, okay, it's like Shen, Talia, Twisted Fate, Aphelios, Thresh. They win that game. Hands down.
Yes. Yes. I don't see how they yes. I like
Will they go for that?
No.
Will they beat GS? Right? These are the first questions.
These are the questions, right? Like if they don't go for that, do they beat GS?
It's like, don't try to beat Chovy. Just keep 5-man diving bot lane.
I don't know if they'll beat GS. I put GS 3-2. That's how uncertain I was with this.
Yeah.
Like, by no means is Galactasaray a good best of 5 team. Anybody watching the TCL and all their best of 5s, that was a hot train wreck. And so I was pleasantly surprised at the results Galactasaray were bringing up going into this. Mostly because I didn't think they were going to beat Beyond Gaming and UOL. I thought they were going to be competitive with UOL and not like absolutely wreck them. And I thought that Beyond Gaming was going to be slightly smarter about their situation. And here's the world we're in. If they do 3-0, tomorrow, like Beyond Gaming, and it's because they're drafting properly, then I will have confidence that they're going to be competitive against Hama Life. If it's a close series against Galactasauri, I almost automatically think Hama Life are going to win, with no doubt.
Okay. And we're saying that hinges on it's don't pick Misfortune. Don't care about it at all.
No.
Don't bother with it. Don't pick amumu.
Don't pick Ezreal.
I don't think Ezreal's a big problem.
The problem is that they pick Ezreal with the express intent of having him be a backliner, just not doing anything aggressive, not being a carry. They picked Ezreal, I think, 3 out of 5 games, and one of them won.
Yeah, but the one game they won was completely the Ezreal.
Yeah, yes.
It was the Ezreal show, but so he can win the game on Ezreal.
Yes, you can. You will win the game much more with the Draven.
Okay.
Honestly, just like I don't want to see any.
We have not seen Draven played since the Draven buff.
In Brazil we have.
That makes sense, given
given how they keep getting bans against Red. Yeah. I think that the mood for Saturday's best of fives will be largely dictated by the ones that are going to be played tomorrow. Either they will be stomps on Saturday or they'll be competitive. All depends on the team that wins, how they win, and how well. And you're like, isn't that all the time? No, sometimes best of fives can be hyper competitive or hyper one-sided for one best of 5, and then they move on to the next, and then there's no way that they're going to win no matter how much they tried. Like that is a thing that exists. That's how it looks like right now with Hama Life. It's like right now people look at Galactasauri and look at Beyond Gaming, and then they look at who they have to face after that, and you're like, no, they lose. Just they lose.
Yeah, that's the difference. It's like we talked about before these videos, like LNG and HLE. It's like, yeah, it's the Chovy team versus the Tarzan team, but Tarzan has not been the only player on his team. Like Ale's probably been better than Tarzan.
Yep.
So it's like, yeah, he has a team. Iwandi looks good. Chovy's team has not necessarily been showing up at the same level. So we've been talking about like the star player kind of thing, but like it has not been for LNG. I think that's why they're first place, is because they look like the better overall team, not just the one player or anything.
Oh yeah,
so
100%.
Just throwing that out there.
I think we've talked about and we've given our kind of predictions about what we're expecting going forward.
Yep. My one thing I was keeping track of last year.
Yeah.
So this went up today. Is our total champs is already 74. Because we've seen the one Seraphine ban and the a lot of these kind of things.
Oh, the one-offs. A lot of
a lot of one-off bans and stuff. The one-off Yuumi ban. So we're already at 74. Last year was only 80 champs total. The entirety of Worlds. We're already at 74.
So we're
now that being said, 2019 was 92, which was the most ever. And I think we had like 88, 87, 86 kind of thing before that. Do we expect this year to be more than 92?
No.
No?
No. I think it'll hit like 88.
Okay.
Barring any new development. Like if all of a sudden Varus is good again to play, which he's not. Like the problem comes with the fact that like the two key roles to this meta, being bot lane and top lane, have very limited pools that people are very afraid to experiment with. The most that's going to be experimented with is top lane.
I was going to say, yeah. What is the most flexible role currently?
Is the most flexible role currently?
Yeah.
I'm going to say jungle. No, is it mid lane?
Top.
It's top lane. Oh, great.
Lane. 19 different champs have already been played in top lane.
How many of them are one-off bans, and how many of them are just
Not one-off
one-off?
bans, like actual
Oh, actually
picks.
played. Oh, interesting. Okay, that's not
19.
what I've. So no, I don't think it'll be added more though. Given that fact, I'm almost certain it won't be more. But that's just given.
I think it will be more because I'm looking at it and I'm seeing a lot of things. I'm seeing some stuff that's missing still. Like these on these 74, it's like, yeah, Viego got nerfed, but it's kind of, is someone gonna pull him out for something? Sure. Like we haven't seen Morgana, she got buffed. You know, we haven't seen we haven't seen the Soraka or the Sona, which got good buffs to them,
Mm-hmm.
and like someone might still be going for it. I don't think. Oh, we have seen a game of Draven,
We've
but
seen many bans for Draven.
there's still stuff missing off this list.
Yeah,
that I kind of expect to see.
I think that we're gonna there's stuff that you're mentioning that is missing that I'm kind of expecting, but I expect it not to hit higher than 88.
Okay.
But we've seen wilder things. We have yet to see Rengar or Kha'Zix.
Yeah.
Or any of the like standard
Standard
assassin
AD.
junglers.
Yeah. Yeah. Rengar got a good buff.
Mm-hmm. My closing off question then for you would be, do you think that there will be a drastic, and I think this kind of ties into your question about the champion picks, but it may not be like necessarily new champions, but do you think there will be a drastic meta shift going into groups? Like drastic?
I think there will be a meta shift. What I'm hesitating on is whether or not it'll be enough to define as drastic. No.
Okay.
I expect to see hopefully a little less, amumu misfortune, a little bit less maybe the Lee Sin, a couple of these kinds of things. But I don't think the overall is going to change that much.
Okay.
Like I think we really haven't seen that many games, but like, the Trendemir and the Orianna and the Silas and the LeBlanc, these kind of things are going to stay in mid lane, right? Like, Misfortune will still be around. We're still going to see the Ezreal and the Lucian and the Aphelios, right? Like, we're still going to see the Leona and the Rakan. Like, no, I don't think it's all of a sudden going to be like, 100% pick ban Nami or something. Like, I don't expect, like, that would be drastic,
Yeah.
right? I don't expect that. But I do expect a change, though.
Okay.
Maybe not as much Jace.
Maybe. Yeah.
Hard to say. They do like Jace. There's some very good Jace players that haven't played yet, so.
Well, I do have a feeling like there will be, and by meta is not always by pick. I think there'll be a drastic, and people will say there's a feel to it. I think there'll be a drastic feel to the meta that'll be changed. Yeah, mostly because like I think right now that there's a lot of very meandering around the map a lot, and it's like people are not fighting for neutral objectives as much. People are not doing as many tower dives. It very much feels like a lot of laning phase and then team fighting phase. I think that come groups we'll see a lot more dynamic early, like more dynamic macro plays as we go through groups.
My one thought, I expect to see not just like a one-off thing. I expect to see at least as a moderately played picks, like 3 games kind of thing at least, of Cho'Gath. I do think people are going to pull out Cho'Gath.
Okay. Interesting. Is this because of Senna?
It's definitely an option, Cho'Gath Senna. Even like mid lane.
Okay.
Because like the same kind of thing we saw with the Malphite, like give me an Everfrost Bruiser Cho'Gath build.
Huh. Well, on that note,
Like your silence for something, it's like you're not gonna kill the Cho'Gath. He
no.
counters his own ultimate by having too much health.
That's funny. Given that, for our next episode of Vision Denial, Josh also won't be with us. He'll probably be with us for when we do the halfway point of groups. All of you who are watching, thank you. We really appreciate it. Leave comments down below about what you think so far of the play-ins. Do you think anything is going to drastically change? Do you think there's going to be some upsets for the best of fives? Any high hopes for groups coming afterwards? We'd like to hear your thoughts about it. Otherwise, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And we'll be seeing you in Vision Denial on Sunday? On Sunday.
Yeah, Sunday. Yeah.
With it, bye for now.
Okay.